It was a quiet afternoon in the small town of Greenfield, a place where nothing much ever seemed to happen. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the streets. Birds flew across the sky, and the rustling of leaves filled the air. But for one young man, Daniel, this peaceful scene was about to change forever. Daniel had always been curious. As a child, he spent most of his time reading books about space, aliens, and distant galaxies. Now, as an adult, he worked as a mechanic at a local garage. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was comfortable. He spent his days fixing cars and his nights dreaming of the stars. One evening, while walking home from work, Daniel noticed something strange. There was a bright, flickering light in the distance, just outside the town. At first, he thought it was the headlights of a car, but the light didn't move. It stayed in one place, hovering in the air. His heart raced. It could be nothing, or it could be something extraordinary. Daniel's curiosity got the best of him. He decided to investigate. He walked down the quiet street, past the familiar houses and the corner store. As he neared the edge of town, the light grew brighter, almost blinding. He was close now, and every step felt heavier with excitement and fear. The light wasn't just any light. It was coming from a large, strange shape, something unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was a craft, a spacecraft. The ship's surface shimmered like metal, but the design was sleek and unfamiliar. The ship was hovering just above the ground, and a faint humming sound filled the air. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He had always dreamed of this moment, but now that it was real, he didn't know what to think. Suddenly, the side of the craft opened with a soft hiss, and from within stepped a figure. It was tall, with smooth skin that seemed to glow in the dim light. The figure was humanoid, but not quite human. Its eyes were large and dark, shining like mirrors. It moved gracefully, like it was floating rather than walking. Daniel stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The figure looked at him, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. Then, in a soft, melodic voice, it spoke. "Human," the voice said, "I need your help." Daniel's heart raced even faster. This was no dream. He was face to face with an alien, and it needed his help. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, Ethan stepped outside. The cool breeze of the morning air brushed against his face, and the smell of fresh earth filled his lungs. But even with all this peace around him, his mind was still racing. He couldn't stop thinking about the alien woman he had seen. He went to work, trying to focus, but her face kept appearing in his thoughts. The strange way she had looked at him, the mix of fear, curiosity, and something he couldn't understand, haunted him. By lunch, Ethan had decided that he needed to find her again. He couldn't ignore the pull he felt. She was clearly in trouble, and somehow he felt responsible for her. Ethan spent the next few hours trying to figure out where she might be hiding. His small town wasn't exactly a hub for alien activity, but he had heard strange rumors from the locals. Some said they had seen lights in the sky. Others spoke of a strange figure roaming the woods nearby. That was where Ethan decided to go. The forest was dense, filled with thick trees and tangled vines. As he walked deeper into the woods, a sense of unease crept over him. His heart was racing, but his curiosity drove him forward. After what felt like hours of searching, Ethan heard a rustling noise from the bushes. He froze, holding his breath. Slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was her. The alien woman was standing there, her silver skin shimmering under the filtered sunlight. Her eyes widened when she saw Ethan, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Ethan could see that she was still frightened, her body tense as if ready to flee at any moment. I knew you'd come," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with a kind of sadness. Ethan took a cautious step forward, not wanting to scare her. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm not going to hurt you. But you need help, right?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the trees behind her, then back to him. "I didn't think anyone would help me," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm lost. I need to go home, but I don't know how." Ethan felt a pang in his chest. There was something in her words that told him she wasn't just talking about getting back to her physical home. She was talking about returning to a place of safety, of comfort, something far beyond the woods they stood in. "You're not alone anymore," Ethan said softly. "I'll help you, whatever it takes." The alien woman's eyes softened, and for the first time since Ethan had met her, she gave a small, tentative smile. It was a smile that made his heart skip a beat. David had never expected to find himself standing in front of a creature so unlike anything he had ever imagined. Her features were both exotic and delicate, skin shimmering like polished silver, eyes glowing with an intensity that made him feel as if she could see straight through him. Despite her alien appearance, there was something unmistakably human about her gaze, an emotion he couldn't quite name, but one that stirred something deep inside him. The alien woman remained silent, watching him closely. Her lips parted as if she were about to speak, but then hesitated. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, a sense of anticipation hanging in the balance. David couldn't help but wonder why she was so calm in his presence. After all, he was just an ordinary human, nothing special, yet she seemed to be drawn to him for reasons he couldn't understand. As she stepped closer, her movements graceful and fluid, David instinctively took a step back. She didn't seem threatening, but there was something about the way she carried herself, so poised, so confident, that made him uneasy. And yet, his curiosity outweighed his fear. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice rough, unsure of what kind of response he would get. The alien woman's eyes softened. She tilted her head slightly, as though trying to decipher the question itself. "I am someone who needs your help." David blinked in confusion. "Help? I don't even know what's going on." "You're not from Earth, are you?" She smiled faintly, the gesture both reassuring and enigmatic. "No, I am not from Earth. But I've been watching you for a while, David." The sound of his name caught him off guard. "How do you know my name?" Her gaze shifted briefly as though considering how to explain herself. "I have ways of learning things. Your heart, it's different." David frowned, struggling to understand what she meant. "My heart? What's that supposed to mean?" "I can sense it," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "You're not like others. You're resilient, kind, and you see the world differently than most." David was speechless. He had never thought of himself as anything special. In fact, he had always felt like just another face in the crowd. Yet here was this mysterious, otherworldly being telling him that there was something about him that set him apart from everyone else. Before he could respond, she continued, her tone turning more serious. "I need to stay hidden for a while. They are looking for me, David. If they find me, they will destroy everything. You must protect me." David's mind raced. Protect her? Why him? What did she mean by they? He had so many questions, but for some reason, he felt like he was starting to understand. Something inside him told him that he was meant to be the one to help her. It was a strange, unexplainable feeling, but it was there, deep in his gut. He nodded slowly, even though doubts lingered. "I'll help, but you need to tell me everything. Everything about why you're here, and who's after you." The alien woman's eyes gleamed with a mixture of gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know how much this means." In that moment, David's entire world shifted. He had no idea what he had just agreed to, but one thing was clear. His life would never be the same again. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow over the dense forest. Lucas was standing near the edge, looking at the alien woman who had now become a constant part of his life. Her name was Zora, and though she looked nothing like him, there was something undeniably captivating about her. Zora had adapted to Earth life in her own way. She wore clothes that Lucas had bought for her, simple human garments that seemed to fit her perfectly. But the way she moved, the way she looked at things, made it clear that she wasn't from here. Despite the differences, a bond had slowly formed between them. As Lucas walked closer to the spot where Zora had been sitting, he noticed something strange. She was staring at the sky with a look of confusion in her eyes. He'd seen that expression before, a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. It was as if she were trying to understand something that couldn't be explained. "Zora?" Lucas asked gently, stepping up to her. He could see her tense, her attention shifting to him, though her eyes remained distant. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft but full of wonder. "About my home, about my people. I don't know if I'll ever be able to return, Lucas." Her words were filled with emotion, and for the first time, he realized just how much she missed her own world. The isolation was something he couldn't even begin to understand. Despite the challenges of Earth, Zora had found a home here with him, but her heart was still far away, across the stars. "I can't imagine what it's like," Lucas said, his voice filled with empathy. "But you're not alone. You've got me. I'll help you through it." Zora looked at him, her alien features softening as a faint smile crossed her face. It was strange how she could look so human in moments like these. The sadness that had once been a permanent shadow in her eyes had begun to fade, replaced by a trust she hadn't shown before. "I never thought I'd find a human who would understand me," she said quietly. Lucas sat down beside her, the weight of her words settling in. For all the adventures and mysteries they had already experienced, this moment of understanding felt different. It wasn't about saving her or being the hero. It was about being there for each other, no matter the odds. "There's a lot I don't understand either, Zora," Lucas admitted, "but I'm willing to try. Together, we can figure it out." Zora nodded, her eyes glistening with gratitude. It wasn't much, but for the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt like there was hope. Hope that even though she might never see her home again, she wasn't truly lost. There was someone here who cared. The moment was interrupted by a soft rustling in the trees, and both of them turned sharply. It wasn't the usual animal sounds that Lucas had grown accustomed to. No, this was something else. Something that sent a chill down his spine. Zora stood up quickly, her body tense, ready for action. "We need to go. Now." The moonlight danced across the forest, casting long shadows on the ground. It was a peaceful night, but the calm air could not mask the tension between them. Serena, the alien woman, paced nervously near the edge of the small clearing where they had set up camp. Her unusual, glowing eyes flickered with uncertainty as she kept glancing at the human beside her. James had been trying to wrap his mind around everything that had happened since meeting Serena. A part of him wanted to push her away, tell her to go back to where she came from. After all, she was an alien, and her very existence could bring danger. But another part of him, the part that had always believed in doing what was right, couldn't ignore her distress. He watched her closely, noticing the slight tremble in her movements, the way she avoided his gaze. James was used to facing danger head-on, but this was different. Serena was no threat to him. If anything, she was the one in danger, and that realization hit him harder than he expected. "Serena," James said softly, taking a step closer. His voice was gentle, not wanting to startle her. "You don't have to hide from me. I'm not going to hurt you." Serena froze for a moment, her shoulders stiffening. Slowly, she turned to face him, her eyes full of conflict. "I don't know how to trust you," she admitted, her voice a mixture of fear and desperation. "I'm not sure if I can." James understood. Trust wasn't something that came easily, especially in a world so full of uncertainty. But he wasn't about to give up. He wasn't going to let her suffer alone, not when he could help. "You don't have to trust me right away," he said, "but I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." For a long moment, Serena said nothing. Her gaze dropped to the ground, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. The weight of her thoughts seemed to press heavily on her, but finally she spoke again. "I've never met anyone like you, James," Serena whispered. "The others, they wouldn't have helped me. They would have seen me as a threat." James nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I'm not like them," he said quietly. "I won't turn my back on you, no matter what happens." A silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was a quiet understanding growing, like a bond that neither of them expected. James took another step closer, the distance between them closing. Serena hesitated, then gave a small nod. It was not much, but it was enough. They were moving forward, together, into whatever lay ahead. As the days went by, the quiet of the forest seemed to offer a strange kind of comfort. Everything had changed. The battles, the risks, the alien threats, they all felt like a distant memory. The human and the alien woman, once strangers from completely different worlds, had forged a bond. Something unspoken but strong. It was hard to explain, even harder to understand. But in this peaceful moment, neither of them felt alone. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft orange glow through the trees. The air was cool, crisp with the promise of evening. Sitting side by side, the human man and the alien woman shared a silence that felt like more than just the absence of words. It was the kind of quiet that spoke volumes. Every glance exchanged held meaning. Every small action a testament to the trust they had built over time. The alien woman, once fierce and guarded, now seemed different. Her eyes, which had once been full of suspicion and fear, now held something new, softness. She shifted slightly, her gaze fixed on the human beside her, as if trying to read him, to understand the complexities of his heart. She had never been one to trust easily, but something about him had broken through her walls. He had shown her kindness in ways she never thought possible. And now, sitting together in the quiet of the forest, she found herself at peace. The human man, on the other hand, couldn't quite shake the feeling that there was still so much more to this alien woman than he had yet discovered. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, mysterious, powerful, and yet fragile in ways he couldn't explain. Her past was shrouded in secrecy, and the future seemed uncertain. But in this moment, he didn't care. What mattered now was that they were together. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face them together. As he looked into her eyes, he saw something that took him by surprise: vulnerability. For the first time, she wasn't the powerful, untouchable alien. She was just a woman, someone who had fought for her survival, just like him. And yet, despite everything, she was still here, still standing beside him. The human man found a sense of gratitude welling up inside him. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't ready to let her go. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible in the stillness of the forest. The alien woman turned to him, her lips curving into a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was a smile that spoke volumes, more than words ever could. She didn't need to say anything. Her eyes, the way they softened when they met his, said it all. For the first time since they met, everything felt right. They were no longer enemies. They weren't just survivors, they were something more. Together, in this strange and beautiful world, they had found a connection that neither of them had expected. And in that moment, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they knew they had crossed a threshold from which there was no turning back. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but for now, they were simply two souls finding solace in each other's presence. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the land, the human and the alien girl sat quietly on the porch of his home. It had been a long journey, one filled with strange encounters and moments that seemed impossible to believe. But here they were, two beings from different worlds, now connected in ways they hadn't expected. The alien girl, her bright green eyes reflecting the warmth of the evening light, glanced at him. She had never imagined she would be sitting with a human like this. Her kind had always seen humans as simple creatures, far below them in terms of technology and power. But what she had come to understand was that there was more to humanity than just their machines and cities. There was a strength in their hearts, a resilience that she couldn't deny. The human looked at her, a gentle smile forming on his face. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "I didn't know what to expect when you first came to me, but I'm glad you trusted me." She nodded, her heart swelling with emotions she had never known before. Her race, the one that valued independence above all else, was not known for seeking help or companionship, but this human, despite all their differences, had been there for her in ways she couldn't explain. "It's strange," she admitted, her voice soft. "I never thought I'd find someone like you. I was always taught that humans were, well, not important. But now, I see things differently." He reached over, placing a hand on hers, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of warmth and connection. It was an unexpected comfort, one she hadn't known she needed. "We're not so different," he said. "We all just want to survive, to find our place in this world." She looked into his eyes, her thoughts racing. This human, this stranger, had shown her kindness and bravery. He had stood by her side when others would have turned away. And now, they were bound by something that couldn't be easily explained. "I'm not sure what comes next," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "But I know that I don't want to face it alone." He squeezed her hand gently. "You won't have to," he promised. As the sky darkened and the stars began to twinkle overhead, the two of them sat in silence, content in each other's company. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt afraid. Together, they would face whatever came next, because now they weren't alone. As the days passed, the tension in the air was palpable. The alien woman, Zira, could feel her heart racing every time she saw the human standing by her side. He had saved her life, but she had no idea how to repay him. The connection between them had grown, but the fear of her own people discovering her secret made her hesitant. Zira had spent many sleepless nights thinking about her choices. The more she thought, the more she realized how much she had come to depend on the human, Ethan. Despite the dangers, he never hesitated to help her. He had given her shelter, protected her from the threats around them, and even fed her when she was starving. Her initial reluctance to trust him had faded into something deeper, something she couldn't deny. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Zira sat beside Ethan by the fire. The crackling flames added to the comfort of the moment, but the silence between them felt heavy. Zira turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something more. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has." Ethan looked at her, a soft smile on his face. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what felt right." Her heart fluttered in her chest. Zira had never felt such warmth in the presence of another being before. She had been taught that humans were dangerous, that they were nothing more than fragile creatures unworthy of trust. But Ethan had proved all of that wrong. He reached out, gently placing a hand on hers. "We've been through a lot together, Zira, and I'm not going anywhere." The sincerity in his words made her chest tighten. She had never thought she would feel this way, especially not toward a human. But here she was, torn between fear and affection. For a moment, they simply sat there in silence, the only sound being the gentle crackle of the fire. Zira could feel a new determination rising within her. She had spent so much time hiding, so much time running from the truth. But now she wasn't sure if she could keep living that way. She turned to Ethan, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I need to make a choice, Ethan. I can't keep running forever, and I can't keep hiding who I am." Ethan nodded, his expression serious yet understanding. "You don't have to do it alone." Zira gazed into his eyes, and for the first time, she felt as though everything was possible. She wasn't just an alien on the run anymore. She was someone who had found something real, something she never thought she would find. And maybe, just maybe, They could face whatever came next together. The air in the room felt thick with tension as they stood there, staring at each other. The alien woman, whose presence had once felt like a strange and distant force, now felt oddly familiar. Her eyes, still filled with mystery, now held a certain warmth, a kind of understanding that made the human feel oddly comfortable, even though he knew little about her world or her customs. "You're not scared of me?" she asked quietly, her voice softer than he had ever heard before. He shook his head, his heart beating steadily in his chest. "Why should I be?" She seemed to think for a moment, then smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory or confidence. It was one of relief. It was as though she had been carrying an invisible weight and finally found someone who could help bear it. "I've been running for so long," she whispered. "I wasn't sure who I could trust anymore." The human didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just stood there, trying to make sense of the words she had just spoken. He had always known that there was more to her than what met the eye, but hearing her admit it was something else entirely. This alien, who had once seemed so powerful and untouchable, was now vulnerable, and it felt as though he had a chance to do something that could change everything. He took a step forward, his voice steady but full of concern. "I'll help you, whatever it takes." Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, and for a moment he thought she might pull away. But instead, she reached out, a subtle gesture that said everything. She was asking for help, not just because she needed it, but because she trusted him. "I don't know how to explain it, but I need to stay hidden for a while," she said, her voice trembling. "If they find me." He cut her off gently. "Then they'll have to get through me first." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, charged with an energy neither of them had expected. She watched him closely, as if weighing his sincerity, and for the first time since their meeting, she lowered her guard just a little. The walls she had built around herself began to crumble, and in their place, there was a sense of trust, something she had not felt in a long time. "I've never met anyone like you," she murmured. I thought humans would be different, but you're different." He smiled softly. "I think you'll find that not all humans are alike." There was a long pause as the two of them stood there, silently acknowledging the unspoken connection that had begun to form between them. In that quiet moment, something changed. The alien woman, who had been a stranger to him not so long ago, was now someone he wanted to protect, someone whose burden he was willing to share. And as they stood there, alone in the quiet room, it became clear that this was just the beginning of their story. A story filled with unexpected twists, but one they would face together. The silence in the room was thick, almost suffocating, as the alien woman's words hung in the air. Her eyes, full of quiet determination, locked onto his. The human, standing just a few feet away, felt his heart race as the reality of the situation slowly sunk in. This wasn't some dream or fantasy. This was real. And she wasn't backing down. "You will be my husband," she repeated, her voice steady, though a glimmer of uncertainty flickered in her gaze. For a moment, the human couldn't speak. His mind was racing, trying to process everything. An alien, a beautiful, mysterious being from another world, standing before him with a demand that shook him to his core. How had he ended up here? He had barely even known she existed just a few days ago. Now, everything in his life was about to change. His thoughts were a blur, but amidst the chaos in his mind, something inside him clicked. The weight of her words, her sincerity, her undeniable need, it wasn't something he could ignore. There was more to this situation than just a simple request. There was a story behind those eyes, a reason she was asking him for this. He couldn't walk away from that. Taking a deep breath, the human finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual, but firm. "Why me? Why me, of all people?" The alien woman's eyes softened, her grip on the edge of the table tightening. "I have no one else. No one else who would understand, who would protect me in this strange world. You're the only one who showed me kindness when I had nothing." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had always thought of himself as just an ordinary person, nothing special. Yet here she was, depending on him. Her voice broke through his thoughts. I don't want to be alone anymore. I've been running for so long. I need someone. And I need you. For the first time, the human truly saw the depth of her fear. It wasn't just about her demand. It was about her vulnerability, her need for safety in a world that had been anything but kind to her. She wasn't asking for power or control. She was asking for a chance to survive, to not be alone. The silence stretched between them for another long moment. The human could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. This wasn't just a choice. It was a chance to change everything. With a soft sigh, he stepped closer, looking into her eyes. All right, he said, his voice gentle but resolute. I'll marry you, but only if we do this together. The alien woman's face lit up with a mixture of relief and something deeper, something that was more than just gratitude. She nodded, her lips curving into a smile. Together, she whispered, her voice filled with hope. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe in a future.